Be the right club. Be the right club today. Yes!
Okay, welcome to episode 4 of the Be the Right Club Today podcast. Hal, how you doing?
I'm good, Jamie.
Good.
Looking forward to talking today.
Yeah, good. We have our guest joining us in-house today, which is great, which is rare for us. Normally we're on the Zoom, but we have Doug Wright, Vice President of Strategic Planning at Heritage Links. Welcome, Doug.
Thanks for having me.
How are you doing today?
Doing well. Good to be here.
Great. Well, Doug, great to have you on. So can you just introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. My name is Doug Wright. I work for Heritage Links. We're a golf course construction company. We're based right here in Houston. Our home office is just down the road, right across from Champions on 1960. I've been working for Heritage for 10 years now. Love what I do, and glad to be here and kind of share some insight on the construction world.
No, that's brilliant. I know, Hal, you talked a lot about this season, bringing all parts of the game together for golfers to play better and not just, golf swing. So, what kind of questions you got for Doug today?
Well, first of all, we started out this year and I said, we're going to make it a whole. We're not going to just talk about golf swing. We're going to talk about all of golf. Last week we had Andy Johnson on from the Fried Egg, who talks a lot about architecture. And Doug knows a lot about architecture. He also knows a lot about the construction process of building a golf course. So, he drew the plans for Darmor, where we're actually working right now, and he's co-designing with me, and Heritage Links is building it. So it's we're having fun out there. So, how many projects do y'all have currently going right now, Doug?
Active projects, I think we have about 15 or 16 going on right now. Last summer, kind of at our peak busy season, we had probably 25 or more going on. So things always generally slow down a little bit during the winter, and then they pick back up in the spring and summertime.
So international, how many projects going internationally right now?
We don't have any right now. We just finished up our involvement in a project in Saudi Arabia. We were project managing the new Greg Norman course outside of Riyadh. Honestly, we're so busy domestically, it really hasn't made sense to chase a lot of international work. As you can imagine, it's just more challenging with the travel and schedules, and we don't really self-perform work overseas. It's more of kind of just providing our expertise. But the domestic market is so strong that we've been focused so heavily on work here in the U.S. that we haven't really even needed to chase work overseas.
Greg Norman, Saudi Arabia, that's a hot topic right there. But anyway, we won't get into that. How many whole golf courses are you doing right now, and how many restoration projects?
So we've got four new construction projects going on, including our project. We're working in South Florida on a 27-hole project with Jack Nicklaus and Justin Thomas called Panther National, which is kind of an interesting collaboration.
Yeah.
We're doing 36 holes in Georgia with the Australian design group OCM, Jeff Ogilvy's company. We've got a new 18-hole golf course in Nashville with Gil Hance, and then we have yours. So aside from those 4 new construction projects, we've got maybe a handful of, I would say, medium to large size renovation projects, and then a handful of kind of irrigation only projects. We're working at Dallas Country Club right now. We're working at Olympic Club doing just the irrigation. There's another contractor doing the golf course work. We'll be doing Colonial Country Club later this year after the tournament's done. So it's really kind of a mixture of new construction, medium to large size renovations, irrigation only, the random kind of bunker or greens renovation projects scattered in there as well.
So let's talk cost. I think everybody out there would like to know a lot about how much things cost, how much it changed over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And I'm going to let you dive into that.
Yeah, it's a lot's changed even just in the last year. I mean, let alone 5 or 10 or 20 years ago. I mean, I would just as kind of a baseline, you know, currently for a new 18-hole golf course, you know, average size, features, you're probably looking in the $8 to $12 million range, not including a whole lot of bells and whistles. I mean, if you start getting into sand capping and solid sodding and bridges and landscaping, I mean, it's really easy to see, you know, construction costs inflate to 20, 25, $30 million. But if you use $10 million kind of as like a baseline for current costs, you know, 5 years ago it was probably more in the like $6 to $7 million range. 10 years ago it was probably more in the $4 to $5 million range. And, you know, 20 or 25 years ago it wasn't uncommon to build golf courses for $2 or $3 million.
So irrigation alone, let's just talk about that because that's gone up significantly over the last 15 years. We were just talking about that before we came on about the difference. So 20 years ago irrigation was?
It was not uncommon to install an irrigation system for less than $1 million. You know, we were actually just talking about this. I think the last project where the irrigation system was less than $1 million, I think, was a project that we did in Mississippi. It was right at like $960,000 or something, and it was minimal. It wasn't a really comprehensive system, but those days are unheard of. I mean, long gone. I would say an average 18-hole irrigation system probably costs in the range of $3.5 to $4 million, and it's not difficult to get into the 4.5, 5, or even more than that. It's astronomical, and a lot of the pricing obviously is tied to, you know, the components that go into it. Pretty much everything that you use in irrigation is a derivative of, you know, oil and gas, whether it's plastic or rubber. And we all know what's going on with oil and gas prices the last year or two. So that's really driven prices.
What do you think? So despite the prices being really high, we're experiencing a bit of a golf boom right now, would you say? Why do you think that golf boom is still happening despite it becoming so much more expensive to build?
I think that it's a combination of things. I think the projects that we see going on right now, there's kind of a common trend. They tend to either be wealthy individuals who are unaffected by typical, you know, market fluctuations. They're private clubs that are well endowed, that have memberships that are committed. You don't see a lot of work in kind of the municipal sphere, the public golf courses, you know, the lower. You see a lot of work still kind of at like upscale public, but you don't see a lot at the kind of medium or lower grade ones. But I think there's still a market for them geographically, depending on where you are. There was kind of like a course correction the last couple years. As we all know, what happened during the 90s and the early 2000s with the golf boom. There was just a bunch of golf courses that were built in areas that they should have never been built. Mm-hmm. Those courses have started to close. So those markets have kind of corrected themselves. And there's a lot of areas now that, I mean, the population is still expanding into new places. Mm-hmm. And so there's a population that's demanding golf. So that combined with, you know, kind of these wealthier, you know, individuals or companies that are willing to go out and build courses in kind of these far off places, and maybe they don't really even care if they ever see a return on their investment. But that's what's driving our business. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of renovation work. You know, everything on a golf course has a lifespan, whether it's the irrigation system, the greens, the bunkers. So everything's got to be replaced at some point.
Mm-hmm. So let's design a golf course here in front of everybody right now. So 15 years ago, when I did Boot Ranch, the back tee 265 yards was kind of the carry yardage that we used. What's the carry yardage today?
Yeah, we usually, we look at it from kind of like back tee to turning point.
Right.
So it wasn't uncommon, 20 years ago, you might use like 250 yards as your measuring stick from, okay, you're going to have the back tee, and then your first turning point's going to be 250 yards from that tee. Then it kind of grew to like 275 yards. Now we're seeing a lot of designs where the architects are using 300 yards as a basis for what the distance is from the back tee to the turning point. And then the other tees, they kind of design around that depending on the skill level. But
Is that an equipment thing, you think, that's causing this distance?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an equipment thing. The guys that hit it far already are hitting even farther today.
Yeah.
So I think it's just a way of keeping up with the Joneses.
Well, we used 250 as a turning point at Boot Ranch, and then anything that was a carry of 265, we knew that was pretty much out of reach for most people at that point, and that's kind of where fairway bunkers and things like that were placed. But things have changed, and we can get into this, but I'd be curious what you think, Doug. But I mean, I've been a proponent of putting more spin back on the ball, and the game is more exciting when the ball is spinning more. It's curving more, the wind affects it more. I happen to believe that golf is art, it's not science. We're doing our best to make it science, but I still think it's a great deal of art. And in a minute we'll get into Darmor, where we're designing out there, and I really want to make it an artistic game out there. We're using the templates, and I really think that a lot of slope, not severe slope, but constantly ball a little bit below your feet, ball a little bit above your feet, a little bit of a downhill lie. 1 degree slopes in the fairway make a big difference on the loft of a club. And what are your thoughts on all that, Doug?
Yeah, I was I consider myself a decent golfer. I was never blessed with a ton of yardage, but I generally did have the ability to play the ball both ways. I always liked hitting shots left to right and right to left, so I like being able to spin the ball.
Yeah.
And it is kind of remarkable what's happened at the upper level of the game with professionals, especially though you look at how they prepare golf courses these days, and the PGA Tour, they're constantly going back to their courses and adding tees or pushing bunkers up in fairways to the point that it's insane. They're using 320 or 330 yards as kind of a placement for a bunker off the tee, because they have to do that in order to keep the pros in check. I think at some point something's got to give. I don't think that's sustainable. Whether it's rolling back the ball or something happening on the equipment side, at some point something's got to give. To me, honestly, I think everybody loves to hit the long ball, but I don't love just bombing it.
Yeah.
Hole after hole. I like golf courses that make you think, off the tee box and present strategy, and you get on the tee and it's not just instantly grabbing for the driver. Maybe it's a 5-wood or a utility club or an iron or something, and you got to think about, where am I going to position this in the fairway to give me the best opportunity on the next shot. It's not just instantly grabbing for the big stick and hitting it as far as you can.
For our listeners, when they're playing golf courses, what kind of things can they look for, or what kind of things will architects do to get in a golfer's head when they're on the tee?
I think a lot of it has to do with, initially to get in people's head, a lot of it just has to do with presentation of the golf hole. What is the aesthetics of the hole? Because those don't always necessarily lend themselves, one-to-one to how difficult a hole is. but there's certain things that you can do to present a hole that makes it look harder or makes it look, easier than what it really is, in terms of, the width of the hole, the placement of the bunkers, how far the bunkers are off of the tee, kind of the layering of landforms in the fairways. You could create a bunker complex right off the tee that, makes it appear as if it's just, going all the way across the fairway or something. And in reality, it might be, 2 or 3 or 4 bunkers that are just spaced in such a way that it gives that appearance, but really there's a lot more room out there than it looks. So I think that's kind of the initial, presentation of a golf hole that makes people think. I mean, obviously, if you've never played the hole before, that's really all you're going off of, unless you've got, a caddy or a yardage book or something that will gives you details on it. But a lot of it just has to do with aesthetics and how the hole is presented.
For you, Hal, was there architects or courses that always just didn't suit your eye, or any kind of look that you didn't like?
Well, the left side of the golf course gave me a hard time. That's what I was trying to always guard against. So things that didn't set up, I mean, I'll be honest, like 18 at TPC bothered me a little bit. And, I played a 3-wood. I mean, the year I beat Tiger, I played 3-wood off the tee the first 3 days and played it down the right-hand side. That was a smart play for Hal Sutton. I left me with a little bit longer shot into the green, but, I approached that hole like par was golden. And I would give everybody some advice out there. When you get to a hole that's really, really hard, are you still trying to make birdie, or have you surrendered and said, okay, par is golden here, and that's all I'm really trying to do. So what do I need to do in order to make that par? Now, when I got to 18 against Tiger, I needed the last shot in, and I knew the only club in my bag that I could hit past his Stinger 2-iron was my driver. I knew I couldn't hit my 3-wood past his Stinger 2-iron. So, he hit it because he had Eagle 16. He hit it off the tee first, and he cured it right down the center. So, okay, driver it is. Here we go. And, and I was driving it good that week, so I really wasn't as fearful of, I had a plan. I knew what I had to do.
This episode is brought to you by Holderness and Bourne. Let's talk about their polo shirts for a second. The fit and fabrics are one of my favourites out there, but Holderness and Bourne really changed the game with the collar on their shirts. You can really spot a Holderness and Bourne collar. It has premium interfacing, sewn-in collar stays, and an English cut that is modern but not too aggressive. Ultimately, what does that all mean? It means you look more polished and more put together. A great collar can frame your face and give you great posture. A great collar also stays sharp, especially in the heat of the summer as you sweat, or maybe you're sweating over those nervy 6-footers. Check them out at hbgolf.com and use code HAL15 for 15% off your next order. That's hbgolf.com.
Let's get back to building a golf course here for a second. What's the hardest part to you when you're building a golf course? Heritage Links is building a golf course. What do you find to be the most difficult part?
I would say probably 2 things. I think the first one is managing the people. Matching personalities and all of the different team members, and you've got architects and owners and golf course shapers and your project manager, your superintendent. You got to marry all of those personalities, and there's got to be good communication or it doesn't work. The second challenging aspect is kind of the things that you can't control, things like Mother Nature. Maybe there's another contractor that's working alongside you that delays the project. The work itself, moving dirt, putting drainage in the ground, building greens, that's the easiest part. It's kind of all of those other less glamorous things that are challenging. But yeah, managing people is probably one of the hardest things, and you can only control what you can control. Obviously, if Mother Nature throws a curveball at you, you just have to deal with it. But those are the things that historically we found most difficult on construction projects.
So one of the things that will affect all of y'all out there as a golfer is where's the water going, and that's also big in construction. I mean, we're paying attention all the time. We're okay. Where are we going to move this water out of here? And that has something to do with the grain and everything else that's going on. So, why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, there's a lot of different concepts regarding movement of water and how you get rid of it. There's a lot of architects that like to try and surface flow everything as much as possible. So, minimal sub drainage, minimal catch basins, try to grade the golf course so that the water just sheet flows off of areas to whatever extent possible. There's a lot of golf course architects that they don't shy away from using infrastructure. They'll put a catch basin anywhere, in the middle of a fairway, in a swale off of a green, and then a lot of it has to do with soil conditions. Once it rains, sure, a certain amount of it is gonna, surface flow, but what happens to the water that goes into the ground, and how do you get that out of, So there's a lot of different kind of methods that you can employ in terms of sub drainage and perforated drainage, and it just kind of depends on what the site characteristics are like, what the soil characteristics, if it's a clayey site or a sandy site. But drainage is definitely a heated topic. Pretty much the only thing people can agree on is that you got to get rid of it somehow.
So let's talk about green substructure. I mean, USGA greens. I'm sure a lot of people out there don't know what goes into a green construction, and it's pretty extensive. That's one of the things that takes the longest on a golf course. So tell them about it.
Yeah, so a lot of people are familiar with the terminology, a USGA green, which basically is the USGA green section developed guidelines years ago on what the proper method was for constructing and draining a green. So in a nutshell, a USGA specification green is basically a green that has a 16-inch depth core. So there's 12 inches of greens mix on the surface. There's a 4-inch gravel layer, and then underneath the gravel layer, there's perforated drainage, which is usually separated at 10, 12, 15 feet. And there's certain specifications for the particle size distribution of the greens mix, the sand. There has to be certain amount of coarse sand particles and medium sand particles and fine sand particles. And there's no doubt a USGA specification green is kind of like the gold standard, but we're seeing a lot of kind of alternate construction methods, whether it's because of the budget, or maybe it's driven by agronomics. You might have a superintendent that's just comfortable with doing something different. It's kind of interesting. I was talking with a colleague the other day, and it's funny how hyper-focused some people get on building a USGA spec green. Because, so take for instance, like the particle size distribution of your greens mix. In order to be a USGA spec green, you have to have less than 5% of very fine sand particles. So it basically means if something is 4.9%, it's within spec. If something is 5.1%, it's out of spec. Well, if you do the math on that, that's 0.002
Right.
difference. Yet somehow, if something's out of spec and something's in spec, it means the in-spec one is absolutely going to work, and the out-of-spec one is going to fail 10 times out of 10 times.
Right.
So it's really interesting, that yes, there are guidelines. Yes, you should follow them, but you don't have to. They're not necessarily hard and fast.
No science to it. They try to make science to it, but the game is still a game.
Well, it's interesting too, because at Darmor we're not using a USGA spec sand, and that was something that our owner actually chose. He said, "No, I don't. It doesn't have to be USGA spec. I know what I'm looking for in a sand. I know where the sand comes from. I know what it's going to do 10 years from now, and I'm okay with it not necessarily being within specification.
Well, that's the business he was in, so he understands it really well, So he's accepting the consequences. He's not going to be wrong, but anyway, let's talk about Darmor for a minute. I knew John O'Donnell, and I had worked with Doug a little bit at Boot Ranch when we redid the greens and the bunkers out there. And I called John and Doug and said, let's go out and look at this property and y'all tell me what you think. And we went out there, and I needed somebody to draw it for me. I couldn't draw it. John offered Doug. I didn't know Doug could do that sort of thing. Doug does that sort of thing. So Doug and I worked on the routing plan, and it was a great piece of property. And last week we had Andy Johnson on, and he talked about Cypress Point being one of his favorite golf courses because it goes into the Monterey Forest, and it comes back out of the Monterey Forest into the dunes, and then it faces up to the ocean, and then it goes back to the forest, and then heads back out to the ocean. Well, that's kind of what we do at Boot Ranch, but not at Boot Ranch, at Darmor. And, it was mined for sand and gravel. So it's got all the areas where it was stripped. So it looks very Scottish in many ways. And we go into that to begin with, and we're out of that by the fourth hole. We go down by the river. We come back and go back through the stripped area and through 9, 10, and 11, and then we come back out of the open area. But, it creates interest by going in and out. I mean, don't you think that?
Absolutely. I think it certainly is, I would consider maybe an unorthodox routing. It doesn't have returning nines. But like you said, it kind of moves through the property in a very deliberate way. When I look at the property, I always kind of divide it into like three areas. We've got kind of the northwest corner where those man-made dunes are from the mining operation. Then we've got the pasture area in the center, and then we've got kind of the bluff area overlooking the river.
Right.
So you're right. You kind of move in and out of all of those areas. You start off, and right away you're going to get the golfer's attention by playing into and through the dunes on 1, 2, and 3, and then 4 and 5 kind of traverse the pasture. 6, 7, and 8 kind of play down and around the bluff, and then you go back through the pasture and back into the dunes, and then you reverse it. And so I think people are really gonna I love the routing. Yeah. I think golfers will really love it too. It's one thing I dislike about design, and sometimes you just can't do it. Sometimes every property has its constraints, but if you've got one really good section of the property, I hate it when you just go through it really quickly and you don't get back to it at some point. Even if you just reserve it for like the last couple holes, it always kind of feels like you see it all the time on courses where you'll play, the first 14 holes will be through the woods, and then you emerge on the ocean or something, and all of a sudden it's, those holes just outshine the others. Anytime you have a really great, feature like we have with the dunes or with kind of the bluff, it's nice to kind of touch those as many times as you can throughout the round and just keep the golfer interested.
So, one of the things that we're going to have an incredible practice facility out there, and I can't wait to get started on that. I was always a practicer, so, that's near and dear to my heart, is building a great practice facility. Let's talk about, there's several holes out at Darmor where the 4th, 9th, and the 12th hole are par 5s. They all are side by side. The fairways will join at some place on all of them, which will be really unique. A lot of bunkering in it. We've got another place where 6 and 13 the fairways combine. That's Scottish in many ways, near your heart. And there's features out there. Let's talk about from your standpoint. What are the features that you like?
Well, I think as it relates to kind of those combined fairways, I think one thing that we've achieved is people are going to feel they're not going to feel alone when they're playing individual holes. Like lots of times you play a golf course and, you might just be in a corridor with trees on all sides.
Yeah.
I think people are going to feel very connected to the property is not going to feel as big as it is,
Right.
because you're going to have a lot of holes that play parallel to each other and they're actually connected with fairways. We're going to have a lot of tee complexes that are essentially a step away from the previous green.
Right.
So
which is very old school.
Yeah, and I think it's just gonna kind of adds to that community sense of golf. You're not out there playing by yourself. You're gonna look over and you're gonna see the group in the adjacent fairway, or you're gonna have time to chit chat when you get to the green because the other group's just gonna be hitting off from that tee. They're not 100 yards away. So I think that's one of the cool features of the course. Those 3 par 5s that traverse the property, I think all of them are going to be really strong. It was we knew going into it that was going to be a hard area to get through, just
Right.
because it's one of the flatter areas of the property. There's not as many natural features, and to link one side of the property to the other, it was inevitable that
We had to go through there.
we had to traverse them, and we had to try and traverse them as quickly as possible. So they
Right.
kind of just lent themselves to having, some par 5s.
But they're going to end up being really cool the way it's all done. And let's talk about we're following CB McDonald and Seth Rayner's templates out there. You're kind of a connoisseur of that. You know a lot about it, and that's one of the reasons why I was super happy to get you involved. I mean, you lived in Scotland for a while, didn't you?
I did. I lived in Scotland for 6 months. I was able to parlay my college education there for a semester. So I was in Edinburgh for 6 months, and I played, I think, 120 rounds of golf while I was there.
Oh, really?
So just about every day. But yeah, that's one thing that I keep going back to. That first day that John and I were out there, and we drove around with Todd, and Todd explained his affinity for Chicago Golf Club, and you started talking about your love of links golf, and I piped up, well, I lived in Scotland for 6 months, and we just started talking.
Yeah.
And it seemed like this perfect kind of, okay, we've got an owner that loves Golden Age architecture, McDonald and Rayner. We both have a passion for links golf. McDonald, borrowed a lot of ideas from the Classics links courses, and we were looking for, okay, what would we do to make this golf course different? Well, there's no golf course, with the exception of maybe one or two within a 1,500-mile radius that really has a strong collection of template holes. So it was kind of just it happened organically, but it made perfect sense within like just a day or two. It's like, hey, let's do it. Let's do it. So yeah, and I'm excited too, because we got a couple template holes out there that you don't see all the time. So,
Well, as we're doing it, I mean, we're biased. Obviously, we are biased. It's a great piece of property. The owner's super passionate about creating something different, and Doug and I are real passionate about creating something different too. It's fun. We've got a lot of great people working on the project, and Mother Nature, as we talked about earlier, hadn't cooperated the last week or two, but we're dealing with a lot of water, so we're seeing where the water's going and where it's not going. But we're going to get it all straightened out. Tell me something else you like let's talk about slope. Explain to people what is severe on a green. What slope is severe?
I mean, generally speaking, so when you think of like pinnable area, people usually think of it as being, at least nowadays with current green speeds, once something gets above like 1.5% or so, it's usually not pinnable.
Right.
So we usually try and design greens with as much kind of 1.5%. There's obviously a lot of transition zones that get above that. 3%, 4%, 5%, even 6% is kind of those moderate slopes. Anything above, say, 6%, that's usually considered in the realm of severe, and you want to try and limit that as much as possible. Or if you're going to have it, you just have to make sure that the green is an appropriate size to match the slopes.
And as you said, green speed has a great deal to do with all of it too. So, in my opinion, I think grasses have gotten too short. I think greens have gotten too fast, and it's put fear in a lot of people. And I remember in the early 80s, I wasn't fearful of, shots didn't get away from us. Now shots get away from you. Things are designed where ball starts getting off the edge of the green. It's 30 yards off the green, 40 yards, some places 100 yards off the green, and you won't see that out at Darmor. I can promise you that. We're not going to have any of that. I believe uneven lies create significant problems for most people. One of the things that I remember the most about playing link-style golf courses in Scotland is, a 20-mile-an-hour wind in my face, and I'm on the slight upslope in the fairway, and I'm trying to keep it down. Or I'm right behind it, and the little hump is right in front of me, and I'm trying to keep a ball down and hit it 200 yards. Those things create a challenge. Okay, how am I going to play this hole? And that's part of golf. Americans, we built golf courses that are forced carries, and we're not using the ground as much as they use in Scotland. And that's one of the things we're trying to do out at Darmor is create a situation where people will use the ground to make the ball. In 2004 Ryder Cup, this will be funny for y'all. The 9th hole at Oakland Hills, pin was on the right-hand side, and every American wanted to go right at the flag on the right-hand side. And we decided that I was going to stand on the 9th tee and say, okay, let's not go for the pin. And Americans are so, dialed in that they can't even hardly play away from the pin. And, that's just a fact. And you are perfect evidence. You played away from the flag a lot of times in Scotland, right?
Yeah, most of the time.
Most of the time.
Sometimes not on purpose. But
yes. Well, okay, yeah. But anyway, long story short, that's golf. You've got to go over here. Pete Dye did a lot of that. He made you look away from, he made you look at a target. And so, we've talked enough about Darmor. It's going to be a great golf course. There's nothing in Houston like it. And it's a fun project to work on. And most fun I've ever had in my life is whenever I've had the opportunity to be in the design process. And I'm looking forward to more of it.
For you, Doug, your time in Scotland now, I grew up in Scotland, but maybe back then I didn't have a trained eye for architecture. I still don't really. But what kind of things did you take from Scotland, course design, or just little things that still influence your thoughts on architecture today?
I think the biggest thing is kind of the randomness of features over there. As you know, it's like the original. The very first golf courses were just kind of laid out at random. It was like, okay, let's drop our ball here, and we're going to hit it to over there, and whatever is in between just happens to be in between. Yeah. All of those little kind of, rumples in the fairways and the placements of the bunkers. There's a very sort of randomness to it. It's evident. You look at an aerial photo of the old course or something, or any of the other Great Links courses, and it's almost like there's no rhyme or reason to it. And it's kind of interesting that this kind of like unintentional design actually lends itself to some of the most interesting design. So much of what modern architects do is, it's so deliberate. It's like, okay, here's the landing zone, and we're gonna have a bunker that's exactly 240 yards off the tee, and then we're going to have another one that's exactly 280 yards off the tee. I think what I took from playing over there was just try and emulate that sort of randomness into golf design. And there doesn't have to be a reason for doing everything. Sometimes just like, it's just a natural fit, or this looks cool, or you know what, let's just put something here and see how it influences the golfer.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things we haven't talked about on here, which kind of lends itself to the question you just asked, when those golf courses were built, they didn't have the equipment that we have today.
Yeah.
So, they couldn't do what we can do today. And then what we can do today with equipment sometimes is too much. The little bitty, a Sand Pro, for instance, can take away a little mound too much if you're not careful. So, one of the goals that I've got for Darmor is I want a lot of that little stuff in there. We had this one place, the second hole where the second green is going to be, and it's got all these little mounds around it. And when Doug and I drove through there, we just said, we'll take the shaper there and say, look, this is what we want. Recreate it in many different places, And so you have to be careful when you've got equipment. It does a lot of great things, but it can also take away some things. Don't you agree?
Oh yeah, I think equipment is one thing, but I think just technology in general has changed the way golf courses are designed and built, whether it's equipment, agronomics, the way that irrigation systems are installed. It doesn't help that, Americans have this sort of inflated expectation of what course conditions are supposed to be. You go overseas and it's not uncommon if something's burnt out during the middle of summer. It's just that is what it is, and that's the fun of it.
Yeah.
But then you come over here and it doesn't matter whether you're a public golf course or a resort golf course or a private golf course. Everybody is trying to attain this level of, quality that there's a balancing act between what can you achieve with the design, yet at the same time still you can still maintain it,
Right.
And everybody has this really, really high expectation of the maintenance of golf courses, and lots of times the design of the course suffers because of it.
Well, and in my opinion, that hurts the youth of America. I mean, I've said many times to my dad growing up, Jack Nicklaus was my idol, and I said, I'm disadvantaged. He grew up at Scioto Country Club, and I grew up at Northwood Country Club, which was a little 9-hole, maybe a step above a municipal golf course. And I didn't have a good lie all the time. And, but as I've aged, I think I was advantaged to do that because I didn't expect a good lie all the time. I didn't expect to be downwind and have perfect conditions all the time. I expected a challenge. I expected to be presented with things that were not ideal. And that's what you're describing right there. And, I think if we could get back to some of that, American golf would be better. And what do you think?
I agree 100%. An analogy I would kind of use is I'm a skier. I grew up in the Northeast, and we're not exactly known for our snow quality, but we're known for producing a lot of really good racers because they grow up skiing on really terrible conditions, right? So it's kind of like if you can ski really well on the conditions on the snow in the Northeast, which is usually ice most of the year, it's like you can ski anything. And it's kind of the same thing with golf. If you grow up playing in less than ideal conditions, or you grow up playing on golf courses that have these uneven lies, and that's what's going to make you better. Just this past week when we were in Orlando for the golf show on Friday, we were able to sneak away and we went and played Bay Hill, which is got tournament coming up.
Right.
It closes in a week. Don't get me wrong, conditions were phenomenal. I'm not going to ever complain about the conditions. They're probably the best they'll ever be in the entire year. But I couldn't help but think, man, this game is so much easier when you're playing off of, perfect conditions. It's like No wonder the pros are so good. They get to play off of this week in and week out.
Well, let me add to that just a little bit. Even though they seem perfect to you, there'll be somebody complaining.
I'm sure they will. I'm sure
that used to amaze me. I mean, we had the best of everything on the PGA Tour, but yet some people just, I mean, I probably hit it in, this would probably be an average. I probably hit it in 10 divots a year. And, I expected to hit it in a divot every now and then. But because I grew up on something I didn't expect a good lie all the time, I dealt with it, But there were plenty of people that, complained big time every time they drove it in a divot. So we're going to venture away from golf course construction for a minute. The Waste Management was last week, and huge crowds, big money. What's everybody think about Scheffler played great.
He actually looked like he didn't feel that great about his game on Sunday and still shot 65. So whenever you're not playing well and you're still shooting 65, it's impressive.
Yeah, he got a great short game. Made a lot of putts.
Yeah.
Started on the second hole making a 40. I thought 49-footer right off the bat. And that always helps. Every time you make a long putt, it kind of feel like your day is going to be good.
And that you said back even. When you played that event at the start, it was always a rowdy crowd around the 16th hole.
Rowdy crowd around 16. I don't know how it got that way to begin with, but they didn't have the stadium aspect of it, but everybody was looking for a good time on 16.
When you made your hole-in-one, were they chucking beers on the green at you?
They weren't throwing the beer out on the green, but it was pretty loud and pretty rowdy.
Yeah.
17 there is really a cool hole too. I didn't think Tom Weiskopf got enough credit. That's a good golf course. That's a fun golf course to play.
Yeah.
And they didn't talk about him enough. He passed away this last year. I had the pleasure of playing a lot of golf with Tom Weiskopf, and I was always impressed with his golf swing and his knowledge of the game. And you see that in his influence in architecture. He's done some nice golf courses.
Absolutely.
I mean, did you work with him any?
I never had the opportunity to. We've done other courses Heritage has with him and with his associate Phil Smith. We've done a lot of work with Phil over the years. Phil previously worked for Jack Nicklaus, so we've got a lot of experience working with them previously. I never had the opportunity to meet Mr. Weiskopf himself, but
great guy. I know I probably played 30 rounds of golf with him while I was, he was quite a bit senior to me, but I always enjoyed playing with him.
Riviera this week.
How about that?
You got some good memories from
I've
Riviera?
got some good memories at Riviera. Tiger's playing this week.
Yep.
I always get excited when Tiger plays. I'm a Tiger fan. I've said this on here many times. He's the only guy that I ever knew that didn't fear the next shot, wherever it was going to go. Everybody had a weakness that I ever played with, and we all played into our strengths and away from our weaknesses. It just looked to me like Tiger didn't care where the ball went. He knew. I mean, he had a plan, and he was trying to make that plan, execute that plan. But if it went somewhere else, I got the shot, he said, And he showed us time and time again that he did. And that's why he was hard to beat. That's why he won so many times. So I'm looking forward to watching Riviera, and I'm also looking forward to watching Tiger Woods. And I hope y'all have a great weekend watching Riviera. Thanks, Doug, for being on today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Doug.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Coming back on, and we'll see you next time.